Okay, everything's okay with the mics? Can you hear me? All right. So this is Marie. I named her after Marie Neurath. And Marie is a full stack visualization designer developer. You can call her a visualization ninja. Give her a data set and she will do everything that you need to transform it into an elegant, easy to read, interactive visualization. So she will wrangle data, she'll pump out a bunch of inventive prototypes, tweak the data mapping, refine the designs, and then in the end present you with a whole new way of looking at your data. Or at least that's what Marie was like maybe 10 years ago. These days, Marie is expected to know the relevant work in visual perception, of course, be well-versed in evaluation methods, be an empathetic, human-centered designer, and a graphics designer, and also an analytics wizard who is great with machine learning, and on top of all of that, can create a compelling, engaging data story that will take the world by storm. So these days, Marie is starting to look a little bit more like this. Or maybe she's actually looking like this. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. So more specifically, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we encounter when a single visualization designer / developer becomes a team of designers and developers who all have to do their own thing, but then they have to talk to each other about it. How many here are actually on data visualization teams or have data visualization teams? All right. How about UX teams? Okay. So maybe I don't have to do as much convincing as I think, but why am I standing here talking to you about this? So until recently, just a few months ago, I was part of a sort of living visualization design studio at the University of Calgary. We were basically the visualization design team, and we were collaborating with the Canada Energy Regulator, which was then called the National Energy Board, and also a software development team at VisWorks. And together we created a series of custom-made public-facing visualizations of open government data related to energy production, demand, and use. And for the design team, this was sort of our first experience working on a project like this. We were used to being a lot more like Marie than being on such a big team. So like the good researchers we were, we spent a lot of time documenting and reflecting about this experience, and then we wrote about it. So the topic I'm presenting about today is based on work that I did with all of my wonderful co-authors at the University of Calgary while I was a postdoc there and also leading the design team. So we know that a multi-team setup isn't really unusual for the software development world. Plenty of software companies have entire teams of UX designers. Some of them never really have to write any code. These designers have to prototype and test their designs just like anyone else. They have to communicate with developers and other project stakeholders. And there are actually plenty of tools out there that support UX designers. They're not perfect, but they're actually quite well used. So tools that let you storyboard animated interaction workflows, Adobe XD, InVision, Figma, that sort of thing. Tools that let you create these really precise design and style guide specifications, such as this one here, Zeppelin. And we really tried to use some of these tools when we were communicating with the developers. And they were a little bit helpful, but we still ran into a lot of challenges. And we did a lot of soul searching here, because we kept surfacing all of these challenges that we had and thinking, like, why was that difficult? And how did we actually make that mistake? And so we're human, so we had that working against us, and actually many humans, so that was even worse. And we had limited time, and we were working with people in different locations, sure, all of those kinds of challenges. But that wasn't really all of it. So when it really came down to it, we realized that a lot of our challenges happened because of this. Data visualization design is not the same as user interface design. And why is that? Well, it's because of the data. Now, I know that you might be thinking data is a really big part of software design in general. Most software is designed to read and process and interface with data to some extent, but data permeates every single corner of a visualization. It dictates their form, their interactions. Data gives visualizations their meaning. So if you take a look at this visualization here, it shows reported incidents on federally regulated pipelines and pipeline facilities. And every column that you see here is taken directly from the data set. And in each column, there are categories, and the size of those categories is determined by the number of incidents in that category in the data set. The gray line that you see connecting the two columns, that is determined by how many incidents in one column. So for example, you see incidents in Alberta highlighted there. How many of them were a release of substance? So absolutely everything here has a color, a shape, a position that is determined directly by the data. And you can see how many things change when I actually perform an interaction. So just watch how many elements on the screen change with just this one simple drag of a new column into the visualization. So I'm going to step back and really quickly go through what our process looked like. We started with the data. The data providers at the CER would give us the data, and they would support our project and define it. Our job was to design these polished, production-ready visualizations and pass them off to the software development team. And then the development team of VisWorks would basically make sure that our designs turned into these real live, rock-solid visualizations that the public can actually access at any time. And they were worried about things like, performance, does it actually work, squashing all the bugs, that sort of thing. So once you start splitting into teams, you get this kind of task breakdown. And I'll be the first to say we had a really, really high degree of separation, and I wouldn't expect this to be the case always, but that high degree of separation actually really highlighted some of these challenges that we have. And so it made it possible for us to actually notice these. So I'm going to tell you about 4 challenges that make visualization design different from your standard interaction design. And then I'll point you about where you can learn about 2 more. So the first of these is articulating data-dependent interactions without actually having to program them first. So remember, we were the design team, not the programming team. And if you look at this visualization that I showed you earlier, it is showing these relationships between columns. And as I mentioned, when you move a column into the visualization, a ton of things change. And I had to take that video from the live visualization because actually creating a mock-up of this was incredibly, incredibly hard. So this is actually a PDF mock-up that we provided to the developers. And in order to use any sort of conventional UX storyboarding tool, we still had to create all of these by hand. And we did have some help. We used raw graphs to sort of approximate some of those gray lines and how they were all moving between each other, but it was still a lot of manual effort in Adobe Illustrator just to make them perfect. And I'm kind of glad Craig talked about sketching because I'm actually a huge proponent of sketching. But in this case, the reason that we were bothering to make these really, really polished mock-ups was that we actually saw a few benefits that we didn't see with sketching. So first of all, they let us test the designs with real data to make sure that visually they would all fit. Tune the graphic design to the visual weight of the data because remember, we weren't working with the final code. They gave us a way to more precisely communicate the final design. And actually, surprising to me, some of the other stakeholders on the project actually gave us much more useful feedback when we gave them something like this, when they could see the sort of the concrete mock-ups with all of the elements that were integrated, including all of the graphic design elements. Now, I'm a really big proponent of sketching, so I still wanted to show you that we did do a lot of the sketching by hand, but that was just within our design team. And I'm very, very excited about this new crop of tools. These are all research prototypes still, but they're kind of getting at this idea of being able to sketch with real data, and I encourage you all to check them out. So the next one is anticipating edge cases. One of our biggest challenges was actually anticipating when the data would go beyond the boundaries that we expected. So this is a visualization of electricity imports into Canada and exports out of Canada. And the bar chart in the middle that you see also acts as an interactive filter for the time period that you see. And you can kind of see it doesn't really have a lot of room to grow. And we really weren't expecting it to. We'd done all the data characterization. We kind of thought we knew how big those bars were going to be. But what we hadn't anticipated was that when you did a certain combination of filters and you were showing averages, this happened. So the bars just got really, really large and essentially went out of the bounds that we expected. So by this time, our redesign options were super limited, and we ended up using a scale break just to kind of deal with it, essentially. But we're not sure that that would have been our preferred solution had we noticed this way at the beginning of the design process. So what might have helped us here? Some more designer-friendly data profiling tools that could maybe predict some of these edge cases when you have different combinations of interactions. And a way to model and communicate the boundaries of our designs to the developers. Okay, so on to the next challenge, which is preserving data mapping integrity. So you all saw a bubble chart earlier. I'm wondering if you can tell me if the values in this bubble chart are mapped to the size or the area of the circles or their diameter. And so, maybe if I gave you the data, that would help a little bit. But none of you really have a ruler around. So the way you're feeling right now is a little bit what we felt like as designers when we were checking code that was written by somebody else to our specifications. So we don't know if that data mapping was done correctly because it's just not always that obvious. And you have to go in there by hand and check everything. And really, the data mapping is the most fundamental aspect of a visualization. So it's actually quite surprising how difficult it is to verify this piece if you're not the person writing the code. And that also brings me to the next challenge, which is actually communicating those data mappings. Again, data mappings are the most fundamental part of a visualization, and if you are a designer trying to tell a developer what that mapping is, it is still really, really hard. The visualization research community has come up with a few things like visualization specification languages that are maybe taking us on the right track, but this still looks like code to a designer. And it would be really great to see this kind of thing inside of a visual design environment. And then if it could also support these really complex custom visualizations that maybe you haven't seen before. So what we really need are data visualization design tools that actually treat the mapping from the data to the visual as a first-class citizen. So what are some of our takeaways here? First of all, for us, designing in teams has a lot of value. When you have bigger and bigger data visualization projects, more custom projects, if you can bring in more different specialized kind of talent, people who don't necessarily have all of the skills by themselves, but can now work in a bigger team on bigger projects, you now have a chance to bring the expertise to the table, but you run into these huge communication and design challenges. So I'm hoping that pretty soon down the line, we will see visualization-specific design tools and processes that can help you prototype results of interactions and model the edge cases that were caused by these interactions, specify and communicate the data mappings within a design context, and support testing by non-developers. In the meantime, it's great to be aware of these challenges. All the challenges that I talked about could also happen in much closer knit groups. They're just harder to notice. That sometimes get fixed ad hoc. And if you want someone to design visualizations for you, don't assume that your UI or UX design team actually is equipped with the tools necessary to do this. And so I'm just going to give a quick shout out to everybody who worked on this project over the last few years. And I'm also putting up this slide last. It has links to a medium.com article that we wrote on this topic with a few different challenges, as well as our project page where you can find links to the research paper, and actually a link to see all the data visualizations because they are created for the Canadian public. So that's you. And thank you very much.
Excellent, and I'd recommend you go look at this. I've spent hours looking at this because it's much like yesterday when Craig launched his. I didn't get much work done yesterday because it's just the definition of a good visualization is you come for a little bit and you stay forever, not because you have to, but because you want to. So, anyway, I got time for a couple of questions for Jagoda. Any? It was that good, Yogi again.
That sounds like a huge team that you showed there. Did you really have that much discrete data that you needed all of that unique expertise? Or are you a little heavy of the team for the work that you accomplished?
So part of the reason this slide has so many people is that I'm talking about the whole project. So there are researchers in here, there's a project manager. We had a lot of interns come in. It was 5 visualizations actually over 3 years, and we were bringing people in. So at any one given time, the biggest our design team ever was about 6 people, and that was pretty big.
I'm relieved.
Yes. Yes.
Another question? Did an awesome job. There's no questions. Yeah, so I'll ask a question. So I've seen this about a year ago when you released it. Are you continuing on this particular visualization? Is it continuing to grow now that you're within CER, or?
Yeah, so I just started there, and we're essentially trying to establish the same kind of visualization team, but now we're closer to the data experts. So actually trying to mitigate some of those communication challenges. And yes, we may be hiring in the near future. Stay tuned. But yes, we're trying to essentially open up more data, right? This is all about taking data that is owned by the public and unlocking it and making it a little more understandable for the public to see.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, here we are.
This is a question for both you and Senior Craig. The Senior Craig. I wanted to ask how do you prioritize which data to work on? And the second leg of that same question is, how do you prioritize which of that worked upon data you want to present? Like, how do you present something with more importance? How do you attach that importance to both sets of data?
That's a big question, actually. I think that beginning part of the process that I showed, it's a long process. So before we even learned about a project, there was a bunch of legwork done at the CER, talking to data experts and saying, what data would be appropriate? Do you have anything that's really interesting that the public might need to know about? So there's, already before you even bring in a data visualization team, you're thinking, is this possible? But then it's a huge, long process of iteration, going back to the data experts, looking at the data. I find when you do that initial characterization and you see some of the initial charts and what story is actually coming out of the data, right? You start to understand what feels more compelling and what doesn't. But you just have to look at it over and over again with the data experts and with whoever your audience is.
Hey, can I speak on your behalf, Craig? Because I'm a Craig, so it's kind of okay. But my role at Dark Horse is I'm kind of in business development and client engagement. So I take the initial calls that come in from our clients with these fantastic ideas about what their visualization is going to look like. And, before we even introduce them to somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, I have to help them scope down what they want, because people usually underestimate how much effort goes into one of these things. They think, I got all this data, let's just put it on a a portal somewhere and everybody can consume it. But if you're really focused on storytelling and clarity and engagement, the world has to shrink before you even start. And then that whole kind of back and forth piece is what these guys do awesomely, to kind of guide that and not let scope creep happen. But at the end of the day, you got to kind of present the story, and the story is never obvious at the beginning. So.
Do you work with any specific sectors?
Dark Horse? We're Dark Horse is relatively sector agnostic, but it seems that the nonprofit kind of sector has found us on the visualization side. Some of our biggest work, the stuff Craig just did, is very nonprofit. We did some Opportunity Atlas for academic in the U.S. That if you look at opportunityatlas.org, that was one of our first ones. We've done some with the public sector. So, but we do work with consumer packaging good companies, and we work with energy companies, and I'm looking at Craig for other ones. But we're unless it's interesting, unless it's data and a good client, we're willing to go. Any other questions for Jagoda? Excellent.
I'm just wondering with regards to like working with government data, or you said even NGO data, non-profit data. We like around here, like around this room, we all know that data can be made to tell different stories, what the client wants you to say versus what it might actually say. I wonder how you sort of interact with that. Certainly the thing about one of your visualizations showed spillage incidents in pipelines. I'm just wondering how you set up to avoid sort of the conflicts of, oh, well, you're not really telling, oh, we've got less spillages in Venezuela, so you can't really be telling people we've 1,500 spillages because that's half what Venezuela is, so we're actually really safe. And how you deal with those sort of issues and those conflicts of interest.
So you're sort of asking about, are you asking about comparing data between different countries, or are you asking more about controversial data that?
Your clients aren't always going to be as open to just the accepting what the data says.
Tell them the truth of data.
That's true. I can say I've been pretty fortunate because the organization we were working with was from the very, very top. We had a lot of support that data should be open. Actually, the government of Canada has pretty much put out this directive saying data that taxpayers pay for should be open. So there was always a lot to lean on. And actually, it helped a little bit to have some separation between the design team and the data experts. We would talk to them on a regular basis, but when we were designing, we weren't hearing everything that they were saying on a daily basis. Not that anyone really ever said something like, "Oh, don't publish that data. That's not right." It was surprisingly open. So
I think we have the same experience, and it's when you actually present data to a client, it's pretty hard for them with a good conscience to say no, that's wrong. It is. I mean, most people are good, and they can't. If there's ambiguity, they can kind of say, "Well, let's go this way." But if you do a good job of showing them the data, and here's what the story is, we haven't run into that problem too much. And we did a City of Edmonton one recently about how do I say what's the right word, Craig? Climate resiliency. Yeah, and it's all about kind of climate change, and there was data, and there was this ongoing back and forth. But at the end of the day, this is what the data is saying. If you don't like it, I guess you don't have to publish it. But they were really good too, because this is our mandate, is to show what's happening in the past. So, all right. So I think you'll be around for a couple of minutes, and Craig will be around. So thank you for everybody coming. There is still sandwiches out there, so the more sandwiches you guys take with you, the less I have to get out of here. So please pick up a sandwich on your way out, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. So if you want to talk sponsorship, my pitch here, come talk to me afterwards. All right. Thank you.